Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining in for this talk, and thank you for taking the time out to come and hear about an introduction to carbon markets. Before we start, I'm going to just give a brief introduction about ERA, what we hope to achieve, and then we will go on. Then I'll hand it over to Siddharth to introduce the speaker, and then we'll go forward from there. Just a quick reminder, if you just a quick few pointers. During the call, please keep yourself on mute. We will be taking questions towards the end. So just put your questions in the chat and then we will take those questions after that. Okay, so I'll start with a brief introduction about ERA. ERA, the Ecological Restoration Alliance India, is an informal alliance it's an informal alliance that has organizations, communities, and individuals who care about restoration in the alliance. The goal of the alliance is to try and make ecological restoration a more accessible field. And we do this by knowledge sharing, by creating connections within the community, and by through workshops and other things that would come in going forward. The series that we have a monthly series of webinars. One is, and we are starting this new series, which is about carbon markets, because this is something that a lot of members wanted to understand. And that's how we thought about starting this series as well. As far as when we talk about membership and who can be a member of ERA, anyone can be a member of the ERA as long as you have an interest in restoration. We are a little more particular about restoration practitioners and restoration projects because I think there are a lot of avenues for different kinds of projects that are there. What we focus on is primarily where projects that are focusing on recovering native biodiversity. So that's it from me about ERA. And if there are other questions, you do have my email ID, and we can, speak further on those on ERA separately. Right. I'll now hand it over to Siddharth, and Siddharth. I'll now hand it over to Siddharth, and Siddharth will introduce the speaker, and then we will start from there.
Thanks, Arjun. Hi, good morning, everyone. We're here today because we realized that at ERA, a lot of us don't know much about carbon, the simple stuff about how carbon markets work and things like that. And it's something that we all thought was important. And so we're lucky to have Dr. Lakmini Senadheera with us. She's interesting in this regard because she's also worked in Sri Lanka, knows India, knows this area, has run carbon projects from kind of start to finish, and has also worked in impact assessment, worked with the people who set the standards for carbon credits, and is right now based in the US. So she holds she knows it from start to finish in a way. And we've requested for a talk that is quite simplistic in nature. We didn't want to get too specialized. So she will be giving us a kind of a primer to how carbon works, how carbon markets work. And yeah, I think without much more, I'll let Lakmini carry on. You can also follow her work. She'll probably have a link at the end so you can read up more about her and what she does. Okay, Lucky, over to you.
Thank you, Sid. I'm gonna share my screen. Arjun, I'm going to seal your screen now. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, Lucky,
we can.
Okay, great. Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Sid, for the great introduction. So as Sid mentioned, Arjun and Sid asked me to give a very high level introduction to the carbon markets. I'm not going to go into detail, technical stuff. It'll be very high level overview of the carbon market. So I'm going to skip my introduction. Sid gave me a great introduction. So the content, so yeah, I'll be talking about the carbon introduction and carbon markets, type of carbon credit projects, and the development of carbon projects, and a little bit about going beyond carbon, what else we have at the moment, and the questions and answers. So just to set the stage, I'll give you a brief introduction. I'm pretty sure most of you guys would know what's carbon offsetting is. Just to give an example, it's just like offsetting is balancing off your carbon emissions. It can be an organization or product or service or a country which emits carbon greenhouse gas emissions. I will refer to carbon most of the time, but it's actually a greenhouse gas, like a combination of GHGs. And then imagine that you can plant lots of trees all over the world and it absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And that's like, if you emit, for example, 1,000 tons of carbon greenhouse gas emissions, then it absorbs by lots of trees, and then you make it like carbon balanced or carbon zero. That's the carbon offsetting. And lots of corporates, I hope no one will get offended. I'm using Microsoft as an example because it's one of the examples we have public, like they've publicly mentioned about their carbon negative program, and that they are planning to they pledge carbon negative by 2020. So not only Microsoft, there are lots of other big corporates or countries they have pledged to this. So they are kind of the main buyers of these like carbon offsets or carbon credits from the market. So, and just to see, I've put the links to it. You can go and like see what they're doing, because they are one of the reasons I know a bit about Microsoft carbon negative program, because they are planning to purchase lots of carbon offsets to as part of their carbon negative program. So the carbon removals are the carbon credits developed from these like carbon projects, and they are focusing on the carbon removals. Removals mean like actually the reforestation projects. I'll talk about like the project types later, but that's why the carbon markets are important. These are some of the other corporates who are like mainly actively involved in the market. H&M, Puma, I'm not going to read out. This is what I found from carbon neutral companies' websites. So they are one of the leading carbon neutral certifiers in the market. So what is a carbon market? So as we all know, in a market, there are like two parties, buyers and sellers. So for carbon, we have like various buyers. Like one of the known or the popular buyers are like the voluntary buyers, which I showed you before in some examples, like big corporates. And there are like mandatory or like the compliance buyers as well, where they need to reduce their impacts by like mandatory regulatory requirements. Here I showed the left-hand side, the graphic shows the cap and trade market. That is like where the government or the industry, they are required by the law to reduce their GHG emissions if they exceed a certain level. So that's, we call a cap and trade. That's a market too. So that's called compliance market. And the sellers are like the project developers. I assume like we all like, and I hope you all are in the future also interested in developing these kind of projects. So most of the project developers in the compliance market used to be like developed countries and developing countries, but it's that concept is no longer there. So like developers are all over the world now. So I will talk about like the projects and how do we develop projects, and what are the requirements we need to have in a bid. So that's the basic concept of buyers. I'll talk about the markets also. What are the available markets currently? These are some of the terminologies. I'm going to like introduce some terms. You don't need to like know all the things at once. You can always Google and learn more about that. I just like introducing some terms. So the carbon credits, like the unit of the market get sector is the unit called carbon credits. It can be referred as these terms: emission reduction units, certified emission reduction units, verified carbon emission reduction units, or removal units. So these are like, it's the 1 ton of carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emission removal. So based on whether it's certified or verified, you can use this. It can be varied. That's why we have like several names for that. And there are like 2 main approaches for the trading in the market: compliance and voluntary. I mentioned briefly about it. Compliance market, I'm going to skip some of the I don't say non-relevant, but I would like focus on what's important for you mainly. It's the voluntary market, because compliance market is for like certain area like European market or Korean ETA, Korean emission trading schemes. So these are like, it's different, and I don't see India or like Southeast Asian countries will have that's compliant markets anytime soon. So I'll skip some of these, but there's a compliance market. It's kind of like regulated by the government, and these are some of the markets available. I don't know. I'm not going to talk about Kyoto Protocol. I assume most of us might have heard about it. The Kyoto Protocol is one of the earliest protocols established by the UNFCCC to have this platform, carbon trading platform. They were the ones who kind of introduced this concept, a carbon market, and they were the one who like initially put out some standards on those. So according to Kyoto Protocol, we have like compliance by clear CDM, joint implementation, European Union emission trading. COSIA is just released, so it's sorry, is that a question?
I think somebody had unmuted themselves by mistake. I just muted that.
Okay.
Yeah,
No
please
worries.
carry on.
So these are some of the compliance market which are like regulated by the government or certain bodies. And put one example, the Korean emission trading system. So some of the industry sectors, they are mandatory, like they need to report their emissions and reduce their emissions. And the voluntary programs are the ones are like most popular now in the market because it's the one most widely used by the corporates, even governments, and like individuals, like almost all the sectors. If they want to reduce their emissions and take a competitive advantage over the others, then we have to like be in this market. So they use voluntary carbon program, carbon credits. So there are like several standards in the market. These are the standards. I'll come to these standards in details later. And these credits or these removals are registered in a particular platform. Like in particular platforms, it's similar to the stock market. Like there are like several stock markets. You can decide which one you need to go. And these are some of the examples. One is like Market Registry. So Market is the leading carbon credit registry. It's like it's known and widely used by lots of people. And the other ones are like APX. It's also the Vera registry. American Carbon Registry is only in the US. So there are like certain registries limited to countries. Others are like open globally. CDM versus voluntary, I kind of explained. CDM is like the compliance market, and CDM, Clean Development Mechanism, initially initiated by Kyoto, but they were mainly focused on the compliance. But they've kind of realized the voluntary market is the one that people like mostly use, and they now open their carbon credits for voluntary market as well recently. But yeah, so the main the differences are like CDM or the mandatory market is very strict. And there are like high transaction cost, rigid requirements for the carbon projects, whereas voluntary markets are like relatively simple and easy to follow and no rigid, like rigorous requirements. But most of the voluntary, I'll come to that. So these are the main differences. So I'm like focus on some of the statistics we have. I'm referring Forest Trends Marketplace, Ecosystem Marketplace, one of the main forest carbon project analyzer. So if you Google it, you'll find these reports, which is really interesting to see. They record, they kind of like record about the forest related carbon programs and the distribution of those programs, volumes transacted, the standards used. So according to the latest report, which was published in 2020, so I'm referring this VCS, that's voluntary carbon standard. I'll come, this is one of the standards like commonly used by the developers. As you can see in the the top graph, there are like over the years, voluntary carbon standard users have like grown a lot. That means it is the most commonly most used standard for the carbon project development. And in the bottom diagram shows and VCS plus CCB. CCB is another standard, which is like community, climate, community, and biodiversity. So I'll come to that later too, but just to give a brief introduction to that. So when you have a carbon credit projects, now it's the trend is to have like value addition to these carbon projects. CCB is the value addition, whereas the project look at not only carbon reductions, it looks at like the community, biodiversity, and the carbon, all three aspects. So whenever you add those components into the projects, the value and the value of the project and the recognition of the project increases. So people using both standards together now, it's been as you can see, it's kind of like growing. And if this is a bit old, I couldn't find a latest version of the distribution of the projects. This is from the 2017 report. But as you can see, the projects are like now distributed all over the world. And the green color is again the VCS standard. And as you can see, the Plan Vivo standard is another standard. It's now becoming a bit popular because Plan Vivo standard is mainly focusing on community-based reforestation. And the community aspect is a significant criteria they're looking at. So you can see there are like lots of blue dots all over the world now, and India also has a couple of projects now. Sri Lanka has one, which I kind of help with. And okay, so since I thought like it's good to talk about India as well. So some of the facts I found on the web, these are only for your reference. I think you'll be able to Google most of these projects. These are like the CDM projects. If you go to CDM, Clean Development Mechanism website, you can view the public registry view, where you can find certain projects by country or by project type, by volume, any where you want to search. So as you can see, this is not only forest related projects, these are all the carbon credit projects. So the carbon credits, they're like various types of carbon credits, like renewable energy, blue carbon, forestry, soil carbon reductions. I'll come to that, the project types. This is the CDM projects. If you go search VCS forestry registry, you'll find lots of projects registered under VCS registry as well. If you search by the country, these are some of the projects. If you like, if you click one of the project like names, you'll find details also. And one of like, as a project developer, one thing I do, if you have a project, I try to search a similar project which is registered under one of these, and it's easy to like then follow what they've done and how they have calculated. These calculations are most of the time available. There are like documentation process you need to follow. So sometimes it's good to view what others have done. And this is another example: community-based forestation project, degraded lands in India. Sorry, and this is another project. Which is not VCS, it's a Plan Vivo, the standard I mentioned earlier. It's a community-based RED plus. So the RED means like reduce degradation and deforestation. So it's another type of project. So yeah, so if you go to Plan Vivo website, you'll find lots of information about this project. And I'm going to skip this. This is about the REDs and like additional like values where the RED project has like, you know, like sustainable agriculture, reforestation, community, ecotourism. So all the other value additions come up with the project. Okay, so let's move on to the actual carbon credit project types. So as I mentioned before, there are like various types. So we call, okay, so AFLU is the short form for afforestation and land use change. So it has like agricultural based emission reductions or removals. Reduction and removals are two terms mostly used, because non-land use based projects are like mainly reduce of the GHG emissions. For example, renewable energy, it's doesn't absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It just like reduce the emissions. So we use renewable energy instead of fossil fuels. It reduces the emissions. So, but the AFLO projects, it absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That's why it's removals. And in the market, it's the demand for removal is getting like it's increasing, because they are interested in like removing carbon from the atmosphere, most corporates. So like AFLO projects, agriculture-based emission removals, reforestation, afforestation, I think you are much familiar about those terms. Improve forest management, which is like mostly used in USA, because it's applied mainly to the plantation sector, where they apply certain management practices where it reduces emissions and, for example, less fertilizer, improve the soil carbon absorption, managing good pruning practices. Instead of like clear felling, they have like rotation felling. So all those like improved forest management practices will help to reduce remove GHGs and the RED projects. So these are the projects I'm going to kind of focus on, because I feel that's the more applicable types for you. We also call the nature-based solutions, the removals. It has like time-wise potential short-term storage or long-term storage, medium-term storage, based on the project. And these are the standards I already mentioned, and I'm not going to read this out, and I'm not sure whether it's clear. I just last minute screen captured this. These are some of the criteria or principles of like certain project standards, where you like, for example, I mentioned clean development mechanisms. It's kind of like not so much popular now. But for example, if you use American Carbon Registry, so for the project locations, no restriction on project locations. As like, but Climate Action Reserve is only available in United States. Gold standard is no restriction. Voluntary carbon is all locations all over the world. So likewise, these are some of the program, not requirements, but applicability of these standards. And some has like project start dates. If your project has started before these project start dates, then it's not recognized, so you can't apply these standards. So yeah, so I'm going to since I mentioned before, the most popular one is VCS. I'm going to a bit focus on the VCS standards, but all the other standards, all the material, the guidance documents, standard documents, calculation documents, like the emission removals, are available on their websites. You can search by name. If you just type gold standard, you'll find lots of information. So I'm going to focus about the VCS standard, which is like most popular one nowadays. So, and again, the FLU, like afforestation, reforestation, land use change projects. So VCS has this type of like standard, like these are the standards they have. Voluntary Carbon Standard, California Offset Project Registry, Climate, Community, and Biodiversity Standards, Sustainable Development Verified Impact Standard, and red projects, and they've kind of updated their red as like jurisdictional and nested. It's kind of like how we can combine projects together. And they in the voluntary carbon standards, they also have different forms of like guidelines for various types. Yeah, afforestation, agricultural land management, improve forest management, reduce emissions, PCR, like peatland rewetting, conservation. So these are like standards available, and all these documents will have reference materials for the calculation methodologies as well. So if you go to one of the standard documents, you'll see it referred to some of the CDM methodologies as like the step-by-step process of calculation of like removals, how to like record all these, how to verify all these. So it's there. Another thing I wanted to highlight is I mentioned CCB, and there's another standard called SD Vista, which are not directly carbon standards, but they are like kind of like, as I mentioned, value additions. So we can have VCS carbon standard to apply to a certain project, and we also can have CCB. That means like it also has this standard applied into that project, which has a value, which you can like when you sell the project, it will have more recognition than just a carbon project. So these are I'm kind of just introducing all these standards and not going into details, because you'll find lots of materials and information about those standards. And okay, how are we? So we have another 30 minutes, Arjun?
Yes. Yeah, we have another half an hour.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let's move on to the interesting stuff, the project development criteria. So when you are going to develop a project, so I'm going to mainly focus on afforestation, reforestation, or forestry-based carbon projects. There are certain like criteria we need to have. And And as in the right hand side, you'll see the development cycle, or the main development cycle, and the steps and the key players in the project development cycle. So you'll have the project developers who has like land and like some kind of like initial funding and start to develop and like have that intention to develop the project. And then the intermediaries, like you can have intermediaries or not. You can find end buyers directly, end buyer directly for the carbon credits. So the general norm for most of the carbon project developers is to like have the concept not ready, have the project idea not ready before proceed, because if you in the carbon market, you can have a project, but if you don't have a buyer, then you can't guarantee that you'll have a buyer, even though you have registered your carbon credits or not. So it's good. It's kind of a norm that it's good to have like kind of identify your buyers initially, so that you'll have a kind of a guarantee that you'll able to sell these credits. But it's just a norm. You don't need to have that, but that's what most of the developers trying to do first, and then go through the process. You'll have lots of like documentation depending on which standard you're going to follow, whether it's VCS, Plan View, CDM, or whatever the standard you're going to follow. It's the general steps, more like it's similar most of the time. It's just like some of the terms will change standard to standard. One thing, whichever standard you're going to follow, some of these are like these listed criteria I have here are the main requirements you need to have in a project. One is the additionality. That means like the project should not be business as usual. For example, if imagine it's a plantation, like teak plantation, and you're planting trees, but at the end of the day, you're planting it for a business. You are going to sell it. You'll have money by selling those teak wood. So one thing you have to prove in a carbon development project is that you don't have money to start this project, and you don't have any intention to make money out of this project. This is purely like a conservation, and we don't have enough funding to start or maintain this project without carbon credits sales coming in. So that's the additionality part. If I can answer any questions later, if you don't understand, I can give some examples. And then baseline emissions, which is like the baseline scenario. Okay, if you have a land, if it can be a barren land, it can be a half like a semi-forested land. So whatever the land, there's a like baseline carbon pool already exists, and we need to make sure that this base, like the land, will not kind of like naturally regenerate with the time. That we have to kind of like intervene to increase the carbon stock of the land, or make it a forest. It won't happen naturally. There has to be an intervention separately. So we need to make sure that's there. And then the permanence is the long-term sustainability. If there are like risks, once you have the project, you need to identify the risk, flood risks, fire risks, how you're going to maintain the project, like sustainability over the time. And then another term is leakage. Leakage is, as you can see, as it's the net stock change, which like mainly not the natural stock, naturally change, it's a human intervention. Like, for example, if you have reforested a land, and then if the close by village people getting firewood from the land, that is kind of like, okay, we've calculated all the carbon sequestration, but there's a leakage from that land because people are like cutting some of the parts or the trees as firewood, and the firewood, when you burn firewood, there will be an emission. So that's leakage. So you need to quantify that and try to reduce that. So whatever the net carbon removal or the storage would be, like total absorption minus the leakage. And then the risk and buffer, those are like common terms. We need to quantify, like to identify risks and identify mitigation practices, and kind of like keep a buffer based on the risks. For your, if you are following VCS, they have a separate document, risk tool to calculate. Once you identify your risk factors, then it'll kind of like, there's a way of calculating, okay, this will be your risk, and you will have to have this much of a buffer to make sure that you'll compensate all the risks. And then another important part is like verification, monitoring, and registration. So these are the main criteria. I would roughly go through the time frame. It depends of the project time, where you're located, and what type of standard you're going to follow. These are like very average timelines for a project. I'm not going to read. So roughly, if all the steps happens like without an issue, roughly a year, 3 years, 2 to 3 years, you'll be able to like kind of, that's the average project cycle. But it again, like it depends with the verification process, and the size of the project. If it's a big project, and the verifiers might like check lots of like land samples and stuff. So it depends, but this is a rough timeline. This is like solely based on my experience and what I have seen the projects, and that's why I say like it's average. It's not a concrete timeline. And some of the key drivers of the projects, like, and mainly, sorry, the cost drivers of the project is all these factors. That's why I said, like, you will have to have concept note, the size of the project, identify what kind of activities you will need to have, roughly the expenses, and based on that you can kind of quantify the project costs and the project carbon credit cost. I'm not sure that I had that slide here. So the forest-based carbon average price in the market right now is from like $7. It can go up to like $20, depending on the project type. That's why the $7 is the basic reforestation or basic forestry-based project. $20 can be like, okay, it has community aspect, it has CCB standard applied into it, it has SDV star applied to it. Like the value additions can change the price. So yeah, so supply and demand, project type, land. So some projects you'll need to have the land clearance from the government, or I don't know, purchase lands from or some kind of a guarantee from the landowners. So that can cost sometimes. Standard project size. Insurance means like it's one of the terms in the project verification or like registering process. So the registry, if you are going to register in your project in a known registry, example market registry, so they kind of ensure if something happens to your project, they will compensate or they will replace your carbon credits because, for example, our project, like the project I've been working in Sri Lanka, is a Plan Vivo, and it registered in market registry. So if all, like, it's a small project, if the project destroyed by, let's say, a flood, it's registered in market and some of the buyers have already bought the credits. So the buyers, like, then the market registry will compensate the destroyed quantity of the carbon removals on behalf of the project developers. That's the insurance. It can cost sometimes. And terms of the sale, market price, risks, access to markets. That's particularly like how you're going to promote this, where you're going to register these, all those aspects matters. This is the VCS project, like, brief cycle. I'm not going to go into details. I explained roughly stepwise, just to have initial the note, and then in the VCS, they want you to list your project as a pipeline listing project. The VCS, they'll evaluate your concept note, and then they'll do a validation, which is validation and verification, two terms. Validation is like prior to implement your project, they kind of validate all your documentation. They evaluate their estimate carbon credit, like removal quantity, and they see this is a viable project. This is the actual project that can implement. So then once they do that, then you can start project work. You have to like keep monitoring all the project activities. You have to make sure that the estimated number is accurate by actually measuring the carbon. So as you, I don't know, most of you might like familiar with the tree growth, carbon sequestration quantification. You need to measure height, diameter, dBH, all the keep monitoring and track all those to make sure that the estimated number is accurate. And like, this is the cycle. So then we issue, and then they do verification projects time to time, with where I think it's every 5 years time they'll do a verification. It depends with the standard you're going to follow. So with the forest carbon credit types, this will be a bit technical, you don't need to know, but there are terms like ex ante, ex post. You'll sometimes find in documentation or in the project development work. So the ex ante is like you kind of sell the credits before it like kind of like actually have the credits. Like, you're quantifying the future carbon absorption and sell those credits now. That's ex ante. So assuming that, okay, I calculated the growth, expected growth of a particular tree, and it will absorb like 20 tons of it's like 20 years of its lifetime. I'm going to sell that 20 ton to Microsoft now, today. So that's ex ante certifications. But like ex post is, okay, I planted trees now, and by 5 years, you'll absorb this much of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but I can sell only after 5 years, not now. So that's ex post. So most of the standards used to have ex ante credits certified. All the credits are like verified, validated. It's just that like where you, at what stage you're going to sell the credits. But now kind of most of the people or buyers kind of leaning towards exposed because of the risk associated with the projects. And there were like lots of like, greenwashing happening, so quantification errors and not proper monitoring. So because of that, now kind of like most of them are leading towards exposed. And not so much non-certified sequestration benefits, but there is a trend towards like quantifying the removals and balance it off internally, which term called insetting. I'm not going to confuse, but these are like some of the available credit types, and most recognized type is like exposed. So the challenges, as I mentioned, so most of the forestry projects, like you'll have to have a project time of period of like 20 years minimum for most of the forestry base, because I'm like it's basic, because trees will take time to absorb carbon. It's a curve where you like kind of like maximum absorption will happen after like 10-15 years. So at least you have to have 20 years. And the permanence, most of the projects they expect, like standards, they expect you to have like confirm the permanence at least 100 years. Okay, I'm not going to tell the reason, because it's a bit technical, because we are quantifying global warming potential for 100 years time. So that's why that's the limitation there. But don't get confused. That's like they are like expecting if a reforestation project, okay, you quantify your carbon credits for 20 years, but they expect you to have like the forest at least for like 100 years. It's not meant to like destroy just after like 20 years. Forestry projects should complete validation within 5 years. Yeah, that's another challenge. You may be like, if you're working on these kind of like conservation projects or forestry projects, you'll know it takes time. Like most of the implementation activities take time, but it has to like, if project implementation activity exceeds 5 years, then you're not eligible to apply for forest carbon. It has to be within 5 years. You can apply within 5 years and verification can happen after that, but it has to be, once you implement the project, it has to be within 5 years. And yeah, and project start date for CDM 6 months, but for VCS 2 to 3 years. That means like if you have already started a project and 1 or 2 years later, you decided, okay, I can apply this project. I want to apply this project for carbon credits. Then CDM, if it's 6 months, then only 6 months, up to 6 months. If it's older than that, you can't apply. But again, CDM is kind of like old, redundant now. But for VCS, like voluntary market, most of the other standards, you can have 2 to 3 years. That's kind of not a challenge, but it's a good thing compared to CDM. But again, if that's another aspect of the reforestation, like forestry related projects. And then the land eligibility. Okay, so the lands where you're going to have the project has to have non-forest status by 31st December 1989 for CDM, or 10 years prior for VCS. So if the land is now a forest, known like by the definition, it's a forest, then that's why like it's kind of like they expect like that it'll naturally regenerated. If it's 10 years time, it's still the same land, barren land, then you know exactly you need some kind of intervention to make this land a forest. So that's the main criteria they have. And as I mentioned, ex-ante post, it's one of the challenge. Sorry, Arjun, you went on mute.
Sorry, no, I was just doing a time check. We have like 10 minutes left into the talk.
Yes, I
So
am
I
on
just
my
want to
last
make sure
slide.
there's some time for questions, that's all. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you. So I'll go fast. Yeah. So the minimum land area, just to make a project viable, like financially viable, I recommend it has to be 200 to 50 hectares at least. Otherwise, it's not financially viable for most of the type. And then I mentioned the importance of the verification, like monitoring verification, because I think now almost all the projects, buyers are interested if the project is verified and registered, because of like lots of like greenwashing and not like reliable projects there, like the market. So they expect you to do monitoring, reporting, and verification. And my last slides, I'll go through fast. I briefly touched about the beyond carbon value addition to the carbon projects. So this is the project I was talking about my like the Hinidum Biolink project in Sri Lanka. So what we did, it's a community-based, small community-based reforestation project, but it has like all the other like values, community involvement, climate aspect, of course, and the watershed, because it's close to the one of the biggest rainforests in Sri Lanka, biodiversity enhancement. So all the other aspects is there. So these are like value additions. Okay, I don't know. Okay, so these are, it's animated, sorry. So that's kind of like value. So it's a small project. It was initially 20-hectare project. We've kind of initially sold 1,500 credits. It's a small compared to other projects. And we sold it to Marks and Spencer, mainly because they were interested in buying credits from Sri Lanka because of these value additions. And if you are interested, you can like we published a paper on this. You'll have like enough information on that. You can refer. And there are like lots of projects. Like these are some of the examples I found online. This is mainly focused on the biodiversity aspect. So the reforestation to support rescue, rehabilitation, and release orangutan in Indonesia. And this is another project, reducing prevalence of waterborne diseases. This is not a forestry project, but these are like reduce the watershed protection projects will have additional benefits for like the cleaning of watersheds, like water streams, and introduce water filters. So this is another project. And this is another project in India, the improved cook stove. If you see, like there will be lots of carbon credit projects related to improved cook stoves, which has another additional. I'll come to that. So this is another watershed protection project in Chile. So all these projects have additional benefits on top of the carbon. So the orangutan will have biodiversity and enhancing the reforest, like the red is like reduced degradation of the forest. It will have water protection, like all these other aspects. If you can focus on those and quantify, not so much quantify, like at least like qualitatively measure those impacts and add those, which we call like SDGs, Sustainable Development right goals, will add value. And I mentioned a couple of standards, CCB, SD Vista, which verify those benefits, will add value definitely for a project. So that's what I wanted to highlight. Like if you are planning to have a project, think of these aspects as well. This will add value to your project when you are like trying to find find buyers. So that's it from my end. And I've listed out some of the references. And if you like try to search the terminologies or the concepts I introduced, you'll find lots of materials on the web. Thank you. And I think we have 6 minutes to for questions and answers.
Thank you, Lakmini. That was really nice to get an overview of carbon markets and really understand at a broad level as to what all are the possibilities. Thank you so much for that. I think I'll open it out for questions. There have already been quite a few questions that have come on the chat already. So I'll start with the first question, and maybe Shreyansh, if you are there, could you unmute yourself and ask your question directly?
Hey, hi, thanks a lot, Lakmini, for this. I think the question that I had actually was more around just in terms of verification and how does sort of the costs change drastically during verification, and just in terms of that, is there any simpler way for the credits that get generated to have like lower costs with third-party verifiers or using technology? Have you seen some innovations around that in terms of doing this verification?
Yes, it's a very good question, Srinash, because like in US, I haven't had this experience before once, like when I moved here. So there are lots of like, one of the main expenses we have when you're maintaining a project is the monitoring aspect, monitoring and reporting. It's a kind of like main requirements for the verification. Verification cost is kind of fixed and it depends on the standard you're going to follow and the land size and the size of the project. So there's like no like ways to reduce the verification because it's most of the time fixed, but you can reduce your monitoring and reporting costs. And US, you can see like it's a huge, like, there are like huge projects and they use like monitoring, GIS, advanced like I can't remember exactly what we call. So mainly the GPS monitoring, whereas like most of us, like in our project, like we use like manual monitoring and reporting. They use the high-tech technology available now to do the monitoring large scale. You do sampling, you do mapping based on that, and then you can quantify, monitor, and like report. So those are like so. I can't remember the name. Most of these, like mainly the high tech, like monitoring systems using GIS. Yeah, I can't remember the exact term on top of my mind, but I can definitely look for that. They use these high tech ways to monitor and report.
Got it. Thanks.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, for the sake of time, I think I'll just ask the questions that are listed on the chat directly. So I think another part, I'll just take Nikita's question, which is kind of linked to this, is, and if it's already on, when you talk about value additions, do you consider ecosystem services framework, and how are value additions measured? So I think partly this is answered, but just we'd like to hear from that.
Yes, yeah, ecosystem services is the main concept that we add. So it's the carbon credits, what we actually in the scientific term, we call it like payments for ecosystem services. It's like one of the ecosystem service, carbon. And there's like other, like for water, you can quantify. It's, yes, we use the ecosystem services concept because all of these are like ecosystem services we have. So that's the mechanism we apply. And as I think I mentioned, like most of these SDGs, doesn't need to be SDGs, but like all these ecosystem services, we can kind of like quantitatively or qualitatively value and market, like add a financial or monetary value into your project.
Okay. Thanks, Lakmini. Another question I think we had from Hasita, where she was asking, would any of these projects cover marine ecosystem conservation?
Yes. We have under afforestation, reforestation projects, we have a separate methodology called blue carbon. It's recently developed. So for mangrove, all the other like seagrass, marine conservation. Yeah, so there are standards for that. And they're like blue carbon is kind of like very trendy carbon credit projects these days, because as you know, mangrove absorb lots of carbon compared to trees. So like it's a very trendy project type these days.
Just adding to that, is this also applicable for grasslands, wetlands, and other kind of land ecosystems terrestrial ecosystems that may exist? Or I mean, is there other ways to measure for that as well?
Yes, that I did not go into details. Like if you go to VCS methodology list, you'll find lots of methodologies. It's when you say forestation, reforestation is not like just planting trees, just reduce degradation. It's all like blue carbon, wetland protection, like peatland I mentioned. So there are like separate methodologies for those, like how to quantify emission reductions through those projects. It's you'll find, I'm like, you can see those methodologies. Yes, you can have those projects, like those land uses as well.
Thanks so much, Lakmini. I think it's already, we've reached towards the end of the session. There are a few more questions, but would you be able to take them now, or is it possible that we write them to
I
you
don't
as-
mind. I don't mind staying like a couple of minutes more. As long as like if the audience are okay with that.
Yeah, okay. So I'll just then just go through the other questions as well. I was being very selective earlier. Okay, so I think another question is from Sanjay. Sanjay asks, is the enhanced rock weathering geological carbon sequestration project also come under VCS projects?
Okay, it's a very good question, which I am not, which I don't know at the moment. I know it's a removal, carbon removal type, enhanced, like yeah, and I have to check that. I'm not sure about it, but I think if it's even if it's not, and I know clearly it's a removal, a carbon removal project type, you can apply for, if you develop a methodology, you can apply for a new methodology under VCS. Easiest way is to apply under VCS, so that they evaluate your calculation methodology and accept that methodology. So yeah, so it's as long as you can quantify properly, have a method to quantify that, then you can have a project. It's just that like you'll have an additional step. You'll need to get the approval for the methodology on top of like all the other steps we have in a normal project.
Thanks, Lakmini. Sanjay, I hope that answers your question. There's another question, which is again by Nikita, and she was asking, what are the drivers of VCM sellers? Why do they sell, and what's in it for them?
Okay. I assume VCM means voluntary carbon market. Yeah, so we say. So what are the drivers for the VCM sellers? So the drivers is mainly, okay, so if you have a land, I assume like most of us, when I was in Sri Lanka, I wanted to conserve certain areas, like mainly because of the biodiversity, watershed protection and all. So, but the main thing is we don't have enough money to implement those projects. So this is the VCM, like the voluntary carbon market or the carbon market, is one of the ways that you can apply for additional funding to have the project like done or they implement the project. That's the main advantage of having carbon credits concept, because it's just help you like financially to like whatever the project you are currently doing. It's so I know it's some of the developers, they mainly think about the carbon credit. So I'm going to have a carbon credit project. I want to sell carbon credits. There's like some people there are like parties do like that, but I think the actual meaning behind the carbon credits is that, okay, so we want to conserve the environment. We have these lands. We have like this global warming issue we need to stop, but we don't have enough money to do that. So that's this carbon market will help us to have these projects in place. So that's the main concept. That's the main driver we need to have if you are going to develop a project. The developers are the sellers mainly. Yeah. I hope that I answered that question. I don't know.
Thank you, Lakmini. Yeah, I think that does answer that question. There's another question that is, How does the recent controversy related to Vera due to the Guardian newspaper investigation affect voluntary carbon markets?
Oh my God.
Sorry, I know it's a bit heavy of a question, so but it's just I think a curiosity on when somebody starts going towards this direction. How does this change the narrative or the flux that happens because of these situations?
First of all, it's a great question, which I've like briefly heard about it. I haven't read that, so I am not like fully and follow that article. So I think one of the main things the corporates and I know based on my experience working with Microsoft, because WSP, we help them to like review the carbon credit projects. So one of the things they do, they put additional layer of the verification on top of what they have already. So the VERA is just another standard body. So they have like methodologies and they've kind of like doing external like third-party verification. But now the most of the big corporates, what they are mainly trying to do is avoid greenwashing, avoid like the misconduct of like some of the verification aspects. So they do like additional verification by themselves, by their own, like they do. So one of the things I forgot to mention, I think there's this ICRO, like there are like certain like criteria you need to have of like in the carbon credit projects apart from the verification standards. So they check whether it has like legally compliance, it has like no harm to the people by the project, no harm to the environment, no like child labor. So there are lots of times they do additional verification just to avoid these kind of like issues with the verification. So I'm totally not aware about like fully didn't follow this particular article, but I felt that's like something that like you need to have. If you are a developer, you need to make sure that's all the aspects are in order, even if it's like if it's not just a project, it's like actually you're doing something good for the environment. I'm sorry, I know I didn't answer your question because I haven't followed the article, sorry, but I've heard about it. So.
That's okay. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. I think another question. And sorry, I just want to check in with you first. How much more time can we take of yours? Otherwise, I don't
Well,
want to.
it's nighttime for me. I don't have limitations. It's okay.
Okay. So I think there's a question from Kamna, and this is going back to a previous question when we talked about grasslands and open scrublands. So what Kamna asks is, for the site selection for reforestation, is there any land history that is included in the process? And is there any potential threat to grasslands or open scrublands like ecosystems from these initiatives? Primarily
Yeah,
because of the tree
definitely.
focus.
It's a really good question. Yes. So you need to like, yes, it's one of the things as I mentioned, like the baseline. So you need to make sure if the existing ecosystem, we are not going to disturb that. That's something we need to make sure. And there is like if your project activities, if you're intervening the natural cycles, natural flow, natural ecosystems, then it's you can't have that project as a carbon project. So yeah, it's like normally they check the history of the existing land you're going to have. So and that's like baseline carbon, and not only carbon, they check all the biodiversity and other stuff of the land. And like the forestry, I think it has to be like more than 10 years history. They are like we need to check. Yes, you need to make sure that you're not going to intervene the natural cycles.
Okay. Thanks, Lakmini. Another question we have from Sanjay is, like every project tenure is more or less 3 years for 3 years for verification. If in between there's any catastrophic event that happens, then what should be the counter to that or a solution in those scenarios?
Yes, again, another good question. So that's why we have the verification is like kind of like divided into two, validation and verification. So validation happens before you implement your project. So once you have your concept, for example, if you're going to, I'll take my Sri Lankan example. So we had a pilot project for like 5 hectares, and we planted, we were planning to plant trees, like let's say 1,000 trees in like per hectare in that land. And we kind of like quantified the carbon sequestration like based on the growth models. And we know, okay, so we know for that particular 5 hectares, we'll absorb like 1,000 tons, and we are going to expand it to like 20 hectares or 200 hectares. And this will be our like pilot, and this will be our model. So that's the concept, right? We are not going to like plant all 200 hectares at once. It will be like step by step. And then the concept note will kind of do all initial calculations, identify all the risks. And as I mentioned before, you need to identify a buffer. So if your actual project removals or the sequestration is 1,000 tons, and you identify this land is prone to have flooding or fire risks, then you'll keep a buffer. Okay, I'm going to apply only for like 800 tons for this project, and you leave 200 tons as a buffer. And then that's how you apply. So in between, like when you are verifying the projects after 3 years, if something goes wrong, so there's a buffer, and project verifiers will identify, okay, this project has a buffer if something happens. Unless it's like totally wiped off, then you don't have a project, obviously. So and it has that like option of like you'll conservatively quantify your emissions, and also like during the verification, you kind of readjust your emission reduction calculation based on if like actual something has happened and you quantified the damage, so you can revise the calculation as well. So it's after verification, then it's all up to like the registration and the insurance, as I mentioned. But during the verification, there is a you can like buffer you can have, or there's a way you can adjust all the calculations.
Thanks, Lakmini. There are just two questions about, there are two questions about blue carbon. I think one of them you've already answered, which is blue carbon credits do, mangrove ecosystems do sequester more carbon. And that is, these are things that are, there is literature already that talks about it. I think, Kajal, that was your question. Is there anything more specific in that you were looking for? And sorry, I'm opening that to Kajal for a second. And just a follow-up to that is, are there any blue carbon registries in India? If you could let us know about that as well.
The blue carbon projects in India, I am not sure actually. I know for a fact there are lots of blue carbon projects in Myanmar and Philippines and some of these the other countries in Southeast Asia, but not in. I'm actually not sure about it. I think if you want to, so the blue carbon the standard is VCS only have that standard. So if you go to the VCS registry and type India and blue carbon or mangrove projects, you'll be able to have a list of projects. Definitely, if that's the easiest way I can, like if you want to find out whether there's a project in India. But yes, there's a huge potential for blue carbon in all our like Southeast Asian countries.
Can I interject
absolutely,
for a
yes.
second?
Yeah. Can I talk for a few seconds?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just one thing I wanted to say before you start off with the blue carbon thing was one of the problems particular to India was that what happens is the forest department has ownership over mangroves once it's grown, even it's on private land. So that's what I've been hearing a lot about. So that even if you put mangroves on, say, private land or land that is not technically government land, the forest department claims ownership over the mangroves itself and the carbon credits. So that is one potential that needs to be looked into. Yeah, so you can go on.
Yeah, thanks Sid for like bringing that up. It's the same situation in Sri Lanka as well. So the mangrove forest, like mangroves are like owned by the state, and there's another thing like NDC's national intended targets. They're like country wise. They've kind of agreed to the Kyoto or not. So the Paris Agreement. They reduce their country wise, so they take all the credits from the mangroves for the country's emission reduction. So they are not allowing like to sell those credits outside. It's the same situation in Sri Lanka as well. Whereas some countries, Myanmar, they allow even though it's government owned. Sorry,
Thanks,
Kajal, I think you had.
Kajal
I don't know
was
whether
saying
you.
something. Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is that specifically, like let's start, talk about the private land ownership and the government and the political conflict. But I think there is a couple of law which has developed from our Indian ministry. So nowadays we are getting also the law called MISTI. So it's based on only mangrove protection act. At the same time, they're also targeting the blue carbon. As such, there is a blue carbon economy while they are targeting the community resilience. So, and I'm doing my PhD on that particular mangrove ecosystem. That's why I raised the question whether the particular CCB model or maybe the VCS, which is suitable for formation for me to go ahead.
Yeah, if definitely if you are looking for like some example that you can refer to like help to support your the thesis or something, like you can refer to VCS. Go to VCS Public Registry, and if you can find any mangrove project, you'll have lots of documentation, the calculations and the project concept notes and everything. So I think that'll be like helpful for you to like understand how I'm not sure how it will help for the climate resiliency stuff, but for carbon, you'll be able to find lots of information.
Sure, I'll definitely. Thank you very much.
Okay. We just have, I think, 5 more questions that are there. And one is from this, next one is from Samyukta. She asks, how does low pricing affect the ability of carbon markets to incentivize emission reductions? And what impact does it have on the overall effectiveness of these markets? Following that, what are some potential solutions to the problem of double counting offsets? And how feasible are the solutions in practice?
Great question. So the first one, so the low pricing, I think like it'll definitely affect to the market, like supply and demand, because I'm like it's a very competitive market. So if you're like going to price your carbon below the average, that's totally okay, as long as you make sure that you can cover your project cost. I know it's like in the market, it's always like the contract law, contract between buyer and seller. You can always negotiate, and buyer will always like looking to have something good for a lesser price. So you can sell your credits at a lower price. You just need to like make sure that it'll cover your cost. That's the main challenge we had, because in Sri Lankan, our project, the carbon credit price we sold to marketplace, so the Marks and Spencer, the per credit price was like $35 per credit, which is like much higher than the market price. we purposely did that because our actual project cost was that. If we sell the credit at the average market price, let's say $10, we won't be able to maintain the project. And we actually, even we sold it for like 35, we could not. We have to look for other financial help from other ways to maintain the project, because this more the scale and the type is very important if you are thinking of selling it like lower price. I like what I say, like it'll impact because like when I say like impact to the market is like if you sell your project lower and then actual good projects which has lots of additional values, they won't be able to compete with you, and those projects will fail definitely. So that's the impact of that. Yeah, so those are the things you need to consider if you are thinking of like how you're going to price the carbon credits. The other question you had, I think
I'll just repeat it. I'll just repeat it. What are some potential solutions to the problem of double counting offsets, and how feasible are these solutions in practice?
Yes, so one of the main things to avoid double counting is the registration. That's why like they're like I think I showed a few carbon credits registries, and I told like market is like well known, most popular. So that's the recognition between the registries also, like it's not the same, it's different. So once you register a project, they kind of like maintain the issuance of your carbon credits. So once you, like, for example, if you register your carbon project, you have, let's say, 100,000 tons from your project and register in the market or whatever the registry, and they will kind of maintain the balance, like that 100,000 credits for you. If you are selling 1,000 tons for Microsoft, that 1,000 tons will be reduced from the total, and issue issuance statement for Microsoft. Okay, you purchased 1,000 tons from this project, which is only for you, and they can't sell because we've already like kind of removed that, allocated that for Microsoft. So that's the way of like making sure that it won't sell again. So the registry plays the key part to avoid double counting.
Thanks so much, Lakmini. So I don't see any more. I think most of the other questions that are there on the chat have been answered in different capacities, through the other questions as well. So I think we're good to go on that. I just quickly want to check if there is any one last question that anyone wants to ask directly. You can unmute yourself. Otherwise, we can close the session for today. Okay, I will take that as a no. And I would really like to thank you so much, Lakmini, for taking the time out in so late out there, and taking this time to talk to the entire community and share your thoughts about carbon markets and answering all these questions for them. It was really nice to have you here and share this, and thank you so much. I'd also like to thank all the participants who attended the talk, as well as asked all their questions and were there with us till the end towards this as well. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm like happy to help, and I'm really glad that there were like lots of like great questions. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Siddharth,
Thank
as
you.
well for hosting this and arranging this talk for us as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.